I might get stuck into it. So, hi everyone, and welcome to this event, What It's Like to Be an Associate to a Judge, as part of the County Court's virtual VCE Legal Studies Week. My name's Caroline. I'm a media advisor at County Court, and I'll be moderating this event. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking, the peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, all the attendees of this event have their cameras and mics off, but if you have any questions or comments, just type them into the Q&A box at any time, and then I'll be able to relay them to the panelists. So on our panel for today, we have Emily, Rebecca and Hannah. Each of the associates will tell you a little bit about themselves and how they became associates, and then we'll open it up a bit later and we can have a bit of a dialogue about what they do. So to start us off, Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about you?
Thank you, Caroline. So my name's Hannah Christensen. I'm not currently working as an associate. I was an associate for about 10 years, which is much longer than most people usually spend in the job. I'm currently the Judicial Staff Coordinator at the County Court, so I look after the judges' staff members. My journey to my associate job, I loved humanities at high school. I think I dropped maths in year 11, which I regret enormously, but I had no interest in it at the time. And was really, really motivated to study law. It was sort of the only thing I wanted to do. I got into law as an undergraduate, which I'm not even sure if that's an option for students anymore. I think most sort of law courses now are offered as a postgraduate course, which really is so much more sensible. I really wish I'd been a little bit older when I started my law degree rather than straight from high school. I went to Monash and studied arts law, and I studied part-time and worked full-time for sort of most of it. So it took about 8 years to finish. When I graduated, I worked in policy for 6 months and hated it. I worked in a private commercial practice for 6 months and hated it. And then I applied for a judge's associateship with Judge Anderson, who's now retired. He was head of the commercial list at the time, and I had a little bit of commercial experience. He didn't like me in my interview very much. He asked what I was reading at the moment. Judge Anderson is a prolific reader. And I said, I don't really go much for fiction. I'm really more of a non-fiction type of person. And he shook his head and said, oh, that's the wrong answer. And I was absolutely mortified and withdrew my application. I thought I was going to have another crack at private practice. And he ended up calling me sort of that afternoon. He's like, oh, I was disappointed that you'd withdrawn your application. I was hoping to, we were going to offer you the role, and I was going to try and convert you to being a fiction reader. And we ended up having a really lovely conversation, and I started as his associate, and I stayed with Judge Anderson for 3 years. I was keen to get experience in some other areas of law though, so I started working with Judge Mullane, who was doing mostly common law work at the time, so a lot of serious injury applications. And after 2 years with Her Honour, I was keen to get a bit of experience in crime, and started working with Her Honour Judge Cottrell, and was with Her Honour for about 3 years. And then I sort of, did various roles in the pretrial management of cases in the criminal list. So I sort of along the way decided that I wasn't keen to practice, and have held various administrative and managerial roles in the county court since then. But one of the great privileges of my life has been assisting judges in court. It's truly like most associates sort of do the role because they're preparing for a career either as a practicing solicitor or at the bar. I've sort of gone another direction, but it's a tremendous job. It's a tremendous way to learn. It's a tremendous way to sort of have a mentor to work with when you're a young lawyer graduate. So that's my story. I'll hand over to one of the other panelists now.
Thanks for that, Hannah. I'll jump in there. My name's Emily. I am associate to His Honour Judge Pillay, who works in the Common Law Division here at the County Court. In particular, we run the medical list, which looks at some medical negligence cases, if that's of interest to anyone. I'm from Adelaide originally, and I finished my Year 12 in South Australia in 2013. I studied legal studies then, similar to all of you now. After I finished high school, I decided I wanted a bit of a change of scenery. So I decided to move to Melbourne. I got into Monash University straight out of high school. Similar to Hannah, I think I also did an arts degree and a law degree there, which I really enjoyed. I kind of liked having arts to balance out the pretty intense study that comes with a law degree. I did literature and I'm a big fiction reader, so I would have done well in that first interview, Hannah. While I was doing my degree, I was working part-time at a personal injury law firm. And then after that, I got a part-time job as a paralegal in an NGO that specialised in a pretty niche area, which is international parental child abduction. So it's kind of an intersection of international law and family law. And I loved my job there. But I finished up at that job when I finished my degree last year. After I finished my degree, I had applied for a bunch of different firms. I'd done a clerkship at a big personal injury firm. It's sort of marketed to you at the end of your law degree that if you want to practice as a solicitor, that you need to do a clerkship, which is sort of like 4 weeks in a firm, and they sort of judge whether they want to hire you as a graduate solicitor or not. Unfortunately, I didn't get offered a job as part of that process. It's pretty competitive and full on. But in my mind, it actually is kind of fortunate because it led me to this job, which is fantastic. This is my first full-time job out of uni. So if anyone's kind of interested in that pathway, I guess, from high school to uni to straight into a job like this, I'm more than happy to answer any questions about that. And I definitely agree with Hannah. This is a fantastic job. You get to see litigation firsthand. You absorb a lot, you learn a lot. And it is a great mentor relationship that you have with the judge that you work for. Yes, that's a little bit about me. I might pass on to Rebecca.
Thanks, Emily. So my name is Rebecca. I'm originally from Ireland, and I think just off the bat, it's indicative of the differences between Hannah and Emily and myself. It's quite representative of the people who work at the county court. People come from all walks of life, all backgrounds. I have a bit of a long story to get to where I am today. So I moved from Ireland about 6 years ago, and I was a teacher. So out of high school, I studied music, and then I did a postgrad in education, and I was a teacher for 7 years. And 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to move to England. And while I was there, I thought, I've always really been interested in law. I love being a teacher, but if I can potentially affect change or see behind the scenes of how a lot of these decisions get made in our day-to-day life, I thought this was a great opportunity. And in England, they have a program called the Graduate Diploma of Law, which is a 3-year law degree condensed into 9 months. So you do every subject full-time at the same time. I don't necessarily recommend it because it's quite a
horrible.
It's quite a whistle-stop tour of the law, but it kind of in one way prepares you for reading copious amounts, juggling lots of things at the same time. But once I finished that, I then came back to Melbourne. And you'll hear from lots of people who are from here, who aren't from here, who tell you how difficult it is to get a job in law. And one thing I would say is look for opportunities in places that you wouldn't even begin to think they would be. That's how I ended up in the county court. I sing with a choir in Melbourne, and one evening, my first rehearsal back after having moved back from the UK, I was sitting next to someone and I overheard him say to the person next to him, "Oh, you know, I'm a lawyer." And I had this internal battle with myself of, oh, I don't want to be that person who's like, "Hi, I'm a graduate, give me a job." But you kind of feel like, but these are the opportunities that I shouldn't really pass up. So I introduced myself, I explained that I had just graduated, etc. And we had a bit of a chat, and that was that. And a couple of days later, I got an email from this lawyer who said, "You know, I was really interested to talk to you the other night. I admire you for being, you know, so open about, you know, where you're at and what you're looking to do. So I'd like to put you in touch with someone." He put me in touch with a friend of his whose father-in-law happened to be a judge. And I can remember distinctly, I was a substitute teacher at a school at the time, and I was standing on the oval during the sports day, and I just plucked up the courage and I called this judge, and I explained my situation, and he said, "Come in and shadow me for the next, you know, from now until Christmas." So I had about 6 weeks shadowing. He's a criminal judge, still sitting judge, wonderful man. And I got exposed. It was my first time being in an Australian court, and it was fascinating. I learned so much in those 6 weeks, even just picking up little things like you have to stand when the judge walks into the room. When someone's being sworn on oath, nobody's supposed to move. It's all supposed to be quite still. So just picking up little things like that was really important in those 6 weeks. And in that time, an advertisement went up for, incidentally, a judge that Hannah used to work for, Judge Mullane. And so I went into that interview, and you know, I felt like I don't know anything about the law. Okay, I have a degree, but what does that really mean? And this was I think it was the 20th of December, and she had said, "Look, don't worry about it over Christmas. I might not make a decision until then." So I kind of walk out and, you know, feeling a little bit deflated. I don't know why, but I wasn't sure. And within 2 hours, I got the phone call to say that I'd got the job, and I was so delighted. I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking the phone call had never happened. And then so that was last January of 2019. I started at the court with Judge Mullane, who was now retired, but was a common law judge. So common law is basically anything that isn't crime or business related is the easiest way to explain it. So as Emily said, things like, you know, serious injury, actually Hannah said serious injury and Emily said medical negligence. And the judge I currently work for, Judge Salamandras, is head of the common law division. So in my role, I get to see everything from, you know, being in trial, in directions hearing, so the steps that need to be completed before you go to trial, but also because of her role as the head of the division, just how we interact with practitioners, practice notes, the relationship with other courts, Supreme Court in particular. It's an absolutely fantastic role to just have that experience and exposure to things that you just don't see when you're a practitioner on the other side. And so I still, to this day, I'm not really sure how I got into the county court, but I know I'm very lucky to be here. It's a wonderfully supportive environment, and it's an experience like no other. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Great, thank you all for sharing. We might open up to some question and answers. I guess the first question, I might go back to you, Hannah, and you can all take turns if you like, is, you know, what would a typical day in the life of an associate look like? Like, what kind of are your day-to-day tasks, and does that ever vary? Can you just give us an idea of what that looks like?
Well, I think a day in the life of an associate is quite different at the moment because of COVID-19. So the county court isn't running criminal trials at the moment. Please, progressing in the criminal jurisdiction, appeals from the magistrates court and a number of pre-trial hearings, but associates aren't really sitting in court with their judge doing jury trials, obviously. So I'll talk about what it would have been like in the olden days. It's a, you know, a government job, so it's a almost always a 9 to 5 job, and you'd arrive at work and check on your judge, see what they need, see if they've written something that requires editing overnight, and generally speaking, most people go into court around sort of 9 o'clock. They might, or 9:30, 10 o'clock, either to continue with a matter that's, you know, the judge has been had carriage of for a while. Generally at 10:30 you start your trial. So, you know, bring the jury back in, start hearing evidence. Lunch at 1 o'clock. You sort of try and fit in little bits of other work during the day, back in court with the jury at 2, afternoon sitting usually until sort of 4 o'clock. And then for the last, you know, hour or so of the day, again, little bits of work, editing, administration, trying to clear up sort of whatever's outstanding on your desk, and always the overriding concern is whatever your judge needs, and making sure that you're looking after them and making their job as easy as possible. Almost always associates are out of court by I'd say at 4, 5 at the latest. The latest I ever sat, one night we sat in court until about 7:45, but that is incredibly unusual. So that's most of my recent experiences in the criminal jurisdiction. Rebecca and Emily might have slightly different experiences.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different in common law. By no means is being in trial a guarantee. Often cases will settle before you go into court, so you'll get all prepared and you'll have all your documents ready and you're ready to impanel the jury and you get all excited, and then the barristers will come in and say, we've settled, Your Honour, we won't be proceeding, which is a bit of a disappointment as an associate when you're, you know, kind of wanting to see a jury trial. But, you know, every now and again you get into trial and there's always something to do, whether it's directions hearings or otherwise. Another part of the job that I really enjoy is the judgment writing part of it. So my judge will often ask me to review his judgments before they're published, or maybe do some legal research on a particular point of law. And that's just a part of my job that I really enjoy, because I really like writing and research and that part of it. But other than that, I would say Hannah's description of what the day is like is pretty good.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with both Hannah and Emily. I think underpinning this role is it's a largely administrative role, which might to some sound not particularly interesting, but the subject matter that you're working with is really interesting. And similar to what Emily was saying about the judgment writing aspect, often my judge will say, can you summarize the evidence of this person? And so I can go back and look at the transcript of the proceeding, because the proceedings, particularly in trials, are often, they have transcripts. So someone's listening in and typing up what's being said. And so I get an opportunity to, you know, it might just be to summarize a paragraph, but it really helps you to understand what is important. Perhaps, you know, what is the evidence that's important here for this particular issue? And then I'll, you know, give that to my judge, and, you know, she might look at it and decide, you know, she's going to edit bits and pieces of it. But it's sometimes it's really really interesting when you can maybe see ideas that you've discussed, you know, in the judgment. Not that you're writing it, that's not it at all, but that you can contribute, and that your opinion is valued, even if you're just a sounding board. It all goes to, as Hannah said, helping them and making their job as easy as possible.
Great. And I'm wondering if any of you can think of any examples of, you know, something really interesting you've come across in your time as an associate, whether it's something that really surprised you, or just something about the job that you find really exciting, or just, you know, any interesting cases that our audience might like to hear?
I was actually surprised at how nice the practitioners are to each other. I know this sounds really strange, but when you're watching, and often it's crime on TV, they're at each other's throats, they're, you know, really quite aggressive with each other, and they storm out of the courtroom. But actually in person, they'll all, you know, they'll often walk in and be chatting and asking about each other's kids, or, you know, whatever is happening in their life. Then they get into their trial and they're all business, but often they'll walk out of the room having a chat or smiling with each other. And so for me, the biggest thing was the camaraderie that you see. Now, I'm not saying it's all, you know, there isn't a little bit of tension or animosity from time to time, but that also makes it really interesting. But I actually think it's a wonderfully supportive network of people.
I think one of the things that fascinates me the most, and you know, because I've been at the court for so long now, I've assisted a number of different judges, and, you know, sort of filled in for a day here and a day there. And what I'm constantly amazed by is how different they are from each other. I've assisted judges who will sit down and, you know, take 6 months to write a judgment. I worked for one judge who handwrote all of his judgments in teeny, just perfect writing, and he would take months to write these judgments that were pages and pages and pages long. And then I've assisted other judges who, and obviously, you know, a sentence is in a criminal matter is different from a judgment in a civil matter, but they would hear a sentence. They would hear, you know, practitioners do a plea, so they'd hear from the prosecution, and then they'd hear from defence counsel. And one particular judge I assisted heard from both parties, and he'd sort of put his head down and, you know, contemplate for 20 seconds or so, and then he'd just deliver his sentence right there, without having anything written down, just based on what he'd been told. And I found that as extraordinary as the you know, sort of spending 6 months to write something. So the profession is, you know, the legal profession is incredibly diverse, but so are the judges on the bench.
I think one of the things that I've found the most interesting has been, I think, kind of the more recent increase in people that come before the court that don't necessarily have lawyers representing them. And it's always very interesting having self-represented litigants in your court. And I find it particularly interesting to observe how my judge will speak to them a little bit differently and try to explain things more clearly, and kind of the role that the court has in facilitating access to justice for everyone in the community, kind of whether they have the money to afford a lawyer or not. And I think that that's something really important that the court does, and just kind of taking that all in has been a really interesting part of the job.
Great. And, you know, not to be all negative, but is there an aspect of the job that maybe you don't like as much, or anything that surprised you in that way? Or I guess if someone was stepping into the job, what would you kind of be like, hey, just FYI? Anything about the job that maybe is your least favorite thing?
For me personally, obviously this isn't going to apply to everyone, but I'm kind of shy. I hate speaking in public. So for me, opening court, doing all the speaking in front of a courtroom full of people, especially my first time when I was kind of on my own, and my judge is relatively new to the court as well, I was absolutely terrified that I was going to say the wrong thing or stand up at the wrong time. So that was probably the part that scared me the most. But after you've done it a few times, it becomes second nature to you. And it definitely, gets easier as you go along.
I think for me, one of the things which I wasn't expecting working in common law, if you work in crime, there is a certain understanding that you're going to be exposed to extremely distressing material. But I wasn't expecting to have that in the common law. It's not to the same extent, but you might have someone who has been injured at work or injured in a transport accident who has suffered, debilitating injuries or lifelong injuries, and the marriages have broken down as a result. And often plaintiffs and witnesses will get visually very upset in court. And I didn't expect to necessarily face that so much in common law. Or last year when I was with my previous judge, we spent 6 months in VCAT, which is the Civil and Administrative Tribunal. So it oversees different types of matters. And we had a case in which parents of a child wanted custody of their child returned to them, and on all the evidence, it wasn't in the best interests of the child. And that was the first time I personally felt very upset by my job. And again, probably more so because I wasn't expecting it, not working in crime. But I think sometimes especially if you're in a trial for a couple of weeks or however long, you're living and breathing all of the evidence, and you have to be it's very important to talk to your colleagues and offload, and even talk to your judge. And the court's wonderfully supportive with support services in that way. We're very supported. But I was definitely surprised. And I suppose it's an aspect I don't enjoy because I don't like seeing people upset or hurt, but it goes to show you just how important the work is, which I'm also really grateful for.
Yeah, I would say everything Rebecca said. When I first went into crime, it's shocking and upsetting, watching people talk about the most horrible thing that's ever happened to them in their life, often. And for you, that's just another day at the office. Again, as Rebecca said, the court is wonderfully supportive of its staff and recognises that vicarious trauma is very real. And there is a wealth of sort of services that employees are able to access to help them deal with that. But I mean, I found the most useful thing is just talking to your colleagues. The court is open plan, so the judges all sit in their own chambers, but their staff are sort of all out in an open plan office. And sometimes the most helpful thing is to just stick your head over the partition and say, "Oh my goodness, let me tell you what happened to me today." And in that sense, my colleagues have always been tremendously supportive.
Great. Yeah, it's very important. And I agree. It's a very supportive place to work, which is great. So what kind of advice would you give to someone who was perhaps looking at becoming an associate, or, maybe unsure if that's the right move to make in their career? And, what kind of person do you think this job would be great for? Because you all come from different places and quite versatile, but what would you say to someone who wanted to become an associate?
If you want to be, if your sort of end career goal is to be a barrister or to be a solicitor who argues in court, there's no better role to help prepare you for that career. You get the opportunity to see very, very good counsel work in court, and often just as useful, the opportunity to see the not so good counsel operate in court, and you can learn as much from them as you can from the good ones. The role is ideally suited to people who intend to have a career, we say, on their feet, meaning sort of on their feet talking in court. Sort of a two-part question, but
interpret it however you like.
In terms of sort of what experience is useful leading up to that, as I said, the judiciary is incredibly diverse, and different judges look for different things. Some judges, when I give them a resume, will turn straight to the section on marks and want to look very closely at the grades you got. Some judges will not even look at that. Some judges will look at your hobbies and your interests. Some judges couldn't care less. Some judges want to ask you legal questions in an interview and ask, whether or not you've read this recent Court of Appeal decision. And some judges will base the, whether or not or who they hire almost entirely on personality and just, if they get a good vibe from you. Some judges will want, someone who's practiced previously. Some judges won't be interested in that. So yeah, the judiciary is incredibly diverse in what they're interested in. So it's hard to say sort of one particular thing is helpful to getting a role like this. Not sure if you have, Emily or Rebecca, if you've got anything more concrete than that.
No, I think I agree. I honestly think that there is a place here for everyone, and that kind of whatever your goal is in the law, there's something that you can learn and something that you can get out of a job here at the court. So even if it's not necessarily your goal to be a barrister, even though this is, really one of the best places you can be to learn about it, there's something for everyone. There's research work involved. I've been involved in a few policy things as well. So I really do think that if you go through law school and you're wondering, what should I do afterwards, to just keep an associateship at the back of your mind, because there's always something to learn and something to get out of it.
I think that's right. And I think it's that emphasis on, often we're taught that life is quite linear. You go to school, you go to uni, you get your degree, you do your clerkship, you do maybe your graduate year, and that's the entry into law. And I think this job is actually a great example of how that doesn't have to be the way that you go about it. And I actually think it's a wonderful job for people who might not know. Some people know they want to work in family law or in crime or in mergers and acquisitions. Others aren't so sure. I'm not so sure right at this moment. I always thought I was, intent on being a barrister, but I'm questioning that now. And this job is a really wonderful place to get exposure to lots of different aspects of the law before making those decisions. And as, Hannah said, judges are, wonderful, weird and wonderful people. As she said, some will ask you about what your footy team is, and that's the basis they'll hire you on. But the whole point being is that there is, and Emily said it too, there is a spot for everyone, regardless of your background, your interests. And it's definitely not something I would encourage anyone to pass up. It's a wonderful place to start a career or transition, if perhaps there are some people who've gone to work in private practice, like what Hannah was talking about, who then decide, actually, I'd like to sit the bar exam. I'm going to come to the course and get that exposure, sit the bar. We've just had, lots of associates who sat the bar exam last weekend. So it's for everybody.
Okay, great. And clearly listening to you all, even though it is, a 9-to-5 kind of job, it's not a, very relaxing job by the sounds of it. You can have really full-on days. So how do you think the best way to kind of maintain that work-life balance? How do you go about that? I'm sure that's different for everybody, but yeah.
One thing that I always tell my staff to do, and it's become even more important to me since I've been working from home during the pandemic, and it's just very good life advice as well, I think. I always tell my staff that they should, when they finish their day, they should put their hands on their desk and sort of spend a moment just being mindful and thinking about thinking about their day, but thinking about how they're going to leave that all at work before they go home. And even just the act of sort of physically taking a moment to put your hands on your desk and leave your work, I think is really, really powerful. So that's, I managed the associates who worked in the sexual offences list for a couple of years. And, you know, their whole job is dealing with sexual offence matters. And they would do that every sort of night before they went home, so that, you know, sort of these matters weren't running around in their head at night. So I think that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, one thing I would say is take your lunch break. It is very easy to just continue working, and particularly working from home. You're working where you live and you're living where you work. But even in court, you know, in these courtrooms, often most of them don't have any windows. So you can go for hours without seeing any natural light, or it could be raining, there could be a thunderstorm, you have no idea. So I found getting out at lunchtime, walking down to Burke Street Mall, maybe popping my head into Myer, just getting out at lunchtime and getting some fresh air, just as a way to step away from your computer if you can. Sometimes you have crazy lunchtimes and you just have to work through and get things done. But I know, like, my judge is very supportive, and even while we're working from home, she'll say, step away from your computer, I'll see you at 2 o'clock. And so it's just in the daytime, looking after yourself by doing things like that, I think is really important. And also talking with other associates about, you know, I actually work on the same floor as Emily. So we'll often have catch-ups and say, what have you got on? What have you got on? And then somebody will tell you about theirs, you tell them about yours. And it's a shared camaraderie. And even if you're having kind of like just a not so great day, you're walking past people all the time, you just smile, and that just makes a difference, which you don't really get at home, which I have to say I am missing. But yeah, take your lunch break. You don't get there's no prizes for sitting at your desk all day if you can actually get up and, you know, go out and just enjoy a bit of the outside world.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of that. I think certainly lately, it's been a little bit, I'm either at 0 or 100 in this job. I don't know if it's just the luck of my chambers, but it seems to be either there's not too much on because everything is settling, or there's suddenly 50 things on at once. So I think being able to take those proper breaks when you do have the time to is the way to go. But that being said, in general, the hours at the court are very 9 to 5, and it is very manageable, I think, to maintain that work-life balance. Yeah, I think maybe one of the more difficult parts is separating yourself if there's been something particularly emotional that's happened in court that day. And as Hannah and Rebecca have both said, it's just important to be able to talk to your colleagues about it and know who you can talk to and who you can't talk to about different types of cases.
Okay, great. And I guess, what are your future aspirations, either within the role or beyond? Like, where do you see your next step going?
I actually, next week, I am officially qualified, which is very exciting. But I'm not entirely sure yet. In one way, I would like to combine my previous career as a teacher with my new career in law. And within the court, there's opportunities to train other associates and to, you know, be involved in project work. The court also hires now like divisional lawyers, so that's definitely something I'm, you know, keeping in mind, because the court is such a fantastic place to work. That's one potential. The other is I might consider sitting the bar exam next October, but I'm not set on that course just yet. And if this pandemic has taught me anything, it's maybe not to plan too far in advance, because the world has other plans itself. But for right now, I'm just excited to finish my PLT and be fully qualified, and then see what happens. But I know that I'm currently in the best position I could be in while I'm still making those decisions.
Yeah, I think I'm in a position a little bit similar to Rebecca there. I also am just about to become qualified as a lawyer, which is exciting. And yeah, like Rebecca, I think I'm still kind of figuring out what steps I want to take next. As I've mentioned a few times, I think one of my favourite things about the job is the research and really seeing how social issues that play out in our community intersect with the justice system and the courts. So I would love to one day work in a job where I'm able to make some sort of difference or have some sort of influence in how the courts and how the justice system in general can better serve the community.
Great. And what was it like when you first applied for the job, and what was that process like? Was there like a series of interviews, and what kind of things did you say when you applied for the job that you think might have helped you out?
Casting my mind back, that's a tricky one. I think, to be honest, because I was a young graduate, obviously at the time that I applied, I had written about 50 cover letters at that point, so it all sort of blurs into one. But I think it was just the fairly standard, because as a grad, you don't have years of work experience behind you to draw on and all these examples to say, well, I've done this, I've done this. You have to just sort of rely on the whatever sort of volunteer or part-time experience you do have, and just play to your strengths. So I had things like written communication, being respectful in court, kind of having some sort of ability to know how to manage traumatic things that might come up in court in front of you. The actual process for me was there was an advertisement to be placed on the Order of Merit. So it was a CV, a cover letter, and then I think there were a couple of extra questions online that I had to fill out. So I submitted all of that, and then I had an initial interview with 2 members of court staff who were not judges, and it was just standard interview questions about, how you work in a team, how you might manage a particular situation. And then from that stage, I think my name got placed on the Order of Merit. And then judges can kind of go through that list of people and sort of pick out who they want to hire. I actually interviewed at first instance for one of the judicial registrars at the court, and I didn't get that position. Someone, I think, transferred from the Supreme Court who was a lot more qualified than me, I think. But I was then called in for another interview with Judge Pillay, and it was a very different interview to everything that I'd experienced at firms, which could be pretty rigorous and kind of testing your technical knowledge a bit. It was more of a relaxed interview. He kind of asked me a bit about, what's your background? Like, where did you study in high school? How did you find your experience at uni? Because I had moved states, I think he asked me, that's a big move. How did you find that? So it was a bit unlike any sort of interview I'd ever had, but it was definitely one of the better interviews. So that was the process for me.
I think, like with Emily was referring to the Order of Merit list, which is generally speaking now how associates are hired. So they apply during this bulk recruitment process, are interviewed by me or at the moment, and looking to get on that list. And then when a judge is looking for an associate, they'll look at that Order of Merit list. And we receive an absolutely overwhelming number of applications. And we received sort of many, many more than we expected to this year because of the pandemic. And it seems like very obvious advice, but so many of these applications haven't been proofread and are addressed to the wrong person, are addressed to the Supreme Court when they're applying it to the county court. And when you're looking for, through 400 applications to pick, 100 for interviews, to go on a merit list of 50, if there's spelling mistakes in one of them, or you know, they've replied to the wrong person, or they've forgotten to include a particular document. It's really easy to just put that application to one side. So yeah, for goodness sake, please proofread your applications.
Good advice. And when it comes to the day-to-day practical tasks, is there much writing involved? I noticed, Emily, you said you really enjoy writing. So is there much of that in the job day-to-day?
I think it depends in part for the particular judge that you work for, but I think in one way or another, you're going to be writing something every day, whether that's just email correspondence with parties about particular matters, internal correspondence to other members of the court, especially at the moment with everyone working from home. It's kind of more important than ever that staff are kind of checking in with each other and talking, and we often do that either via email or over an internal messaging system. And then on top of that, there's the judgment side of things. And that's not so much, you know, writing off the top of your head as it is reviewing someone else's writing. So I think it is important to have good written communication skills in the job.
Yeah, and on the back of what Emily was just saying, really good written skills, but not the kind of written skills that you think lawyers should have, as in there's a real focus on writing in plain English, so that, you know, I'm not going to lie, I detest when I have to read a judgment from the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, because it's quite hard to decipher sometimes what you're reading, whereas now there's much more of an emphasis on plain written English, so that anybody who picks it up can at least have a go at understanding it, and making the law accessible, which is definitely a focus for our court. So don't go away thinking, and my judge in particular hates Latin, using Latin words. So you'll have, sometimes they'll be, you know, peppered throughout some judgments, and that's fine, it's a stylistic thing, but she just says, no, that's not for me. That's not how I speak, and that's not how I want to write. So don't think that you have to have, you know, all these Latin words under your belt, or maybe for some judges you do, but being an effective communicator is getting the message across so that people can understand, and that will stand out in your applications as well. You know, you can often tell when someone's maybe gone on and had a search for the synonym for, you know, a very simple word, and they've dressed it up into something quite extraordinary. But that's not how I suppose we talk on a day-to-day basis, and that's, so writing is really important. But just remember that we're not trying to confuse people by what we're saying, and so to just always keep that in mind, I suppose.
Okay, cool. And I guess, is there anything, if you looking back, that you wish that you knew, or that you wish someone told you when you started working as an associate?
I think maybe not to worry so much. That just might be indicative of my personality. But I think, especially if you're coming into it straight out of uni, no one's expecting you to know everything about the law, or to know everything before you start. Just to recognize that you're human and you're going to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, and that you have a community of people around you to help you fix it. And to take an attitude of, well, how can I learn from this? How can I learn? How can I grow? I think that's the advice that, I don't know if I would have taken it and become suddenly stress-free, but that's the advice I would give myself.
That's so true, and I would echo that. I last year, or for at least the first 6 months, majority of the year, I was afraid to say that I didn't understand something. I was furiously Googling things because I was so afraid. Not that I don't want to show that I don't understand, but I felt I should understand, even though this was my first job in law. Whereas now, you know, I even just this morning, we had a trial that, you know, actually settled, and the settlement process, I had never witnessed this particular type of one before. And so once it completed, I had a conversation with my judge and said, what was you know, what's the background to all of this? Why do things run this way? And I'm so much better off now because I ask all those questions rather than sitting feeling like an imposter, like I don't know what's going on and I can't ask because that will mean that I'm not worthy of this job, and that's just not the case. And that's the whole point of having, you know, your judge almost being a mentor to you, and the people around you being mentors. They didn't, yes, they're judges. They are incredible people, super smart, but there was a time when they were in our position and they didn't know. And so the best ones, you know, majority of them encourage you to ask, and they want you to understand because they're invested in you as a person. So again, it's a bit like with the language thing. You don't have to have it all wrapped up in a neat bow on your first day. Just have the will to learn. And that's all that really, if I could tell myself what this, you know, 18 months ago, I think I would have maybe asked a few more questions.
I don't have anything to add. I think that's perfect. Yeah, ask more questions. Even actually, no, I thought of something to add. The judges have, I didn't want to ask questions either, Rebecca, because, and I particularly didn't want to ask them personal questions about sort of their lives and their career, because I didn't want them to think I was nosy. And I was probably a bit shy when I started. And I feel like I've sort of missed an opportunity because they have the most incredible, interesting stories, and, you know, have had such full, rich lives. And so I think as I got a bit older and, you know, sort of when I started working with judges towards the end of my associate career, I asked more questions and asked for their stories, and they're incredible and funny and riotous. So yeah, questions always.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's all we have time for associates. Thank you to all the students and teachers who've attended the event. I've certainly learned something new myself, so I hope you all have as well. And if you haven't already, please visit our website and check out all the free educational resources there. And if you can't make it to any other events, we will be making recordings of all of them, so you can always catch up later. And watch out for an email that might come your way with a feedback survey. Would appreciate if you could fill that out. And that concludes our event. So thanks for coming, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Caroline. Thank you.
See ya.